So I've decided to do book reviews now. Why not? I'm trying this and that just for the hell of it. I'm starting with a lesbian pulp novel from 1966, I believe. Let me check my notes. 1965. Lesbian pulp novel from 1965. This is the original cover, at least the original cover of this edition, which was published in 1965. It smells delicious. It's got the font you would expect from the 60s. It's everything you would want. Look at the back. There was a time when Carrie experimented passionately with many beautiful young women, but she desperately wanted a more normal life, etc., etc. Lesbian pulp novels, I thought, would be a fun place to start with this. I've read quite a few. This one was actually quite a bit better than some of the others, but I'll talk about that in a second. I actually thought I'd start by telling you I'm not someone to toot my horn. It's embarrassing, but given that I'm doing a book review here, and oh, by the way, I did a kind of a 60s get up for you. Vintage, you know. I thought I'd start by telling you my cred as a book reviewer. My undergraduate degree is in communication, women's studies, and English literature. My graduate degree is in English literature. In my master's degree, I taught English literature at the university level, which I think in the States you call the college level, for many years. I got a tenured position. This was before I became disabled, so found myself unable to work anymore. I worked for the gay and lesbian, that was what it was back then. First it was gay, then it was gay and lesbian, then it was gay, lesbian, and bisexual, then it was queer, then it was LGBT. Anyway, you get the idea. I worked for a couple of those presses, mostly local here in town, as well as press up at my university for my undergrad. So I worked for newspapers. I wrote quite a few book reviews, among other things, for the LG newspapers for off and on for several years. And so I believe that gives you my my cred in reviewing a novel such as this. So anyway, I wrote some notes about this novel. I wanted to start it with a little bit of a background in Lesbian Pulp itself. This novel was pseudonymously, this is not her real name, Paula Christian is not her real name. That was the norm for lesbian pulp novelists, especially those who were in fact actually lesbian themselves and actually women themselves. Her real name was Yvonne Christine McManus. She was actually of Hispanic Mexican origin. So she, of course, could not use her real name. Keep in mind, this was published in 1965. Obviously, it would have been written before it was published, so she's probably writing it 1963-ish. So we're talking about a very different time in the United States for lesbian women. Being out and open was not safe. So using a pseudonym was the norm. Pulp novels in general, they got their name pulp because of the pulpy paper, made just really poor quality paper that was used on them because they were cheap. This one was 50 cents. You can see 50 cents. They were cheap. They were never meant to be taken very seriously. They were seen as kind of trashy novels, maybe a little bit, what's the word? Trashy. Again, like socially unacceptable. Their themes and they were sort of racy and a little saucy or something, and you would get them mostly at dime stores, or what they call dime stores, or maybe a drug store. Up until very recently, in drugstores, there used to be like a kiosk or something at some point in the drugstore where you could just grab some crappy novels to read. And in the 50s and 60s, pulp novels, we might call them airport novels nowadays. Pulp novels were, really popular. It would be like watching a bad TV show, just easy, simple, not very serious entertainment. And one of the genre at that time was queer novels, lesbian, gay, bisexual. They usually had very salacious covers. I mean, this doesn't seem all that salacious now, but some of them were more so. I'll show you an example. The idea, there was sort of a promise of some sort of debauched and depraved sex within these novels, based on the covers. Some of them were slightly pornographic looking for the time. There was a sense that, you would read this and it would be, really sexy. In fact, I've read several and they're not really very sexy. I mean, the sex scenes, if you're reading it for hot sex scenes, you're going to be really disappointed. But, it was sort of a sex sells, and they would put these sort of racy images on the cover. And the covers themselves have become kind of cultishly adored by some people. They're very camp. They're very silly. They're tacky. They would often use like the same cover for different novels. Like this cover they'd use here, and then 5 years later they'd use it for some entirely different novel. They were, again, not meant to be classy or anything. A lot of the time, the writers of these novels were actually men, and the intended audience for these lesbian novels were men. So it would be a male author just writing off these novels quickly for a trashy press to make money. And these covers put on it to appeal to men who were looking for a little girl action, as they, I don't know, in the 80s and 90s used to call lesbian pornography. So they weren't written for women. They weren't written for lesbians at all. However, there were some actual lesbians or lesbian wannabes, women who had not yet come out of the closet but knew that they wanted to, who were writing these novels, always with a fake name. The most famous of these would be the Bebo Brinker Chronicles by Anne Bannon, which had and continued to have a real sort of revival, a surge of revival starting 1980s or 90s and just continuing forward. Anne Bannon herself did come out of the closet and became a professor of, I think, linguistics or something. But when she was writing these, she was writing using a fake name and sort of imagining a lesbian world that she hoped existed. The lesbian readership I should say lesbian and bisexual readership found these novels and started to be aware of the fact that some of these authors were probably actually women, and the subject matter was appealing to them. And although the novels were kind of trashy and they seldom had a happy ending and they portrayed lesbianism as an unhealthy lifestyle, it was sort of an acknowledgement of that lesbianism existed at all. And so, these novels were quite popular. They sold quite well. Their plots, I haven't read any of the gay pulp novels, but I would imagine that the plots are similar. They're generally extremely melodramatic, with, really intense emotional shifts, from this kind of manic, high, a euphoria almost of love or discovery of homosexuality or something. And then these like really rapid shifts to this like absolute, lowest of the low. Oh my God, how can I live this way? This is a terrible thing. I shouldn't be doing this. Or, oh my God, how could she do that to me? Or something like that. So, often even within a day, a character could be, all the way up here and all the way down there, all the way back up here, until the reader gets a bit of sort of emotional whiplash. There was also, I haven't read one that didn't include a lot of drinking. There was just this assumption that lesbianism itself was very unhealthy and not an emotionally good choice, not a good lifestyle to choose, and so it would lead to a lot of drinking, a lot of drunkenness, a lot of fights, a lot of breakups. It was just not healthy. So the drinking is, I mean, my God, if I ever even thought about drinking that much, I'd be, just thinking about it would put me under the table. So I find that kind of strange. Lesbian love in these novels is never portrayed as something that can last. Women can't stay together. They can have these sort of dreams of sort of something like a marriage, but there's no way that it will ever work, and the relationship will implode in a very melodramatic and unhealthy way. And the whole experience might lead a woman to actually lose her mind and become crazy because it's just so unhealthy. And often, even when most of the novel you're reading it and going, well, this seems like a decent lesbian love story. Right at the end, they'll be almost like, it'll seem like, here's the novel, it's finished. And then in order to get it published, the author would have to just stick on the end of it, like tack onto it. Something like the main character, the protagonist, would come to her senses and realize, oh, after all, I'm so lucky I have a husband, a heterosexual marriage, and okay, no, that I don't care about the sex, but the sanity and the stability and the emotional health, it's so worth it. This is so beautiful. So now I've come to my senses. Or the relationship would with the woman would fall apart in this horrendous, awful kind of a way, or both, or a woman would suddenly find that after all she could be sexually attracted to a man, and oh, thank God she's normal now, etc., etc. But very often these endings just felt stuck on, like the author was not believing a thing she was saying. I find that often when I've read these novels, and I haven't read them all, but I've read several I've only read the ones actually written by women that have been brought back into publication by lesbian and feminist presses. It would be interesting actually to read some of the ones written by men. For men, it'd be interesting to see how they did it, or if it was, if it's similar or not. But what I find is the ones that I have read that are written by women, a lot of them feel really immature, emotionally immature, and sort of basically inexperienced. The authors really feel, to me, it feels like they don't really know what they're talking about. Anne Bannon has acknowledged that when she wrote her Bebo Brinker Chronicles, she really didn't know what she was talking about. I think she said that the first time she went into a lesbian bar, she was pregnant with her first child by her husband. So she really didn't know anything about, she didn't know anything about loving relationships, because she was married, but she was not in love with her husband because she was a lesbian. So there's always this sort of sense that they really don't quite know how relationships work and what falling in love feels like, because they haven't actually come out of the closet yet a lot of the time, or the authors themselves are very young, or both. And the same goes for the sex scenes. They they're they're actually quite funny to my mind, because it's kind of like, and then they kissed, and oh my god, they fell to the ground, and then kind of like, that's it. Not because there's sort of a censorship, but because the author almost seems not to know what comes next, which is, it's funny, and it's kind of sad actually. So um, I find that surprising. Now, this brings us back to this novel. I was expecting all of these elements when I picked this novel up to read, and I don't know where I got this original edition. I probably picked it up in a free bin or something. At some point, it was sold secondhand somewhere, but I've never been to Fred's Exchange in Prince George before, so I don't know. Anyway, this novel, so I was expecting it to be like these other novels, and it does have several of those elements in it that I've just described. But I was immediately struck by the intelligence of the author, the sophistication of the author, the emotional maturity of the author. She read like she's not an innocent author. She's not shocked by what she's describing or what she's portraying. And she does know that world. She does know the lesbian scene. It's set in a suburb, an unnamed suburb, just outside of New York City, as so many novels are, So she knows about Manhattan. She knows about the lesbian scene in Manhattan. She's well read. The novel itself is well written. The prose itself is quite elegant, I think. So it just feels very, very different from a lot of the other ones I've written. There's a maturity to it and a sophistication to it that I was not at all expecting. She's familiar with psychology, psychological explanations for homosexuality. The people in her world know more about the world than I would have expected. It's written published 4 years before the Stonewall riots, which I'm hoping you know about, but those are considered the beginning of the modern gay rights movement. That was in 1969. So this is 65. The seeds of this gay liberation movement are very apparent in this novel. Things are starting to really change. Not just for a few people, but people are starting to open their awareness of the world a little bit more. So it feels, maybe just outside of New York. I don't know. So Carrie, the main character, she's in her 30s, which makes her a bit older than a lot of the main characters in these novels. She's married with children in this suburb, but has had in the past longish lesbian relationship, which of course imploded in some disastrous way, and she knew what she was, but married because she figured, and when you say married in a novel like this, it's a given that it's a heterosexual marriage. I mean, this is decades before homosexual marriage was legal. She married to have a normal life, to be a normal person, to have what she believed to be a healthy life as opposed to a lesbian life. Right from the start, sex is a problem with her husband. She doesn't like it. She doesn't want to do it very often. Well, she doesn't want to do it ever. He is aware of this. He doesn't know why she's like this, but he's not happy about it. And they do talk fairly honestly about it. Again, it shows a kind of a sophistication that I wasn't expecting. Now, I'm not giving you any spoilers here. She finds out very early in the novel that he's been cheating on her. And it's kind of like, okay, you know. She's upset. She's not upset. She's jealous. She's not of that she wants him to herself, but she would like to be having sex herself and with women. Anyway, at the same time, she's finding herself quite bored. Her kids are getting a little bit older. She gets a job as a salesperson, a door-to-door salesperson, and of course immediately meets Kim, a young married woman, early 20s. She really fits a lot of the stereotypes of the gorgeous feminine lesbian in these novels. She reminds me a lot of what we nowadays would call the manic pixie dream girl. I think everyone's seen the manic pixie dream girl in movies. You know, the kind of kooky, capricious, dramatic, overly dramatic, selfish, highly sexed girl. You see them often, young girl, young woman in movies, in heterosexual movies, but she's got a lot of that going on. She's also very hedonistic, you know, drinking, sex, clothes. She's kind of pouty and petulant. She wants to get her way, but she's also very cynical. She's cynical way beyond her years about love, about relationships, about life. It's all just a grand disappointment and a big old joke. So why not just do whatever you want to do? I'm assuming we can tell which one. You know, she's probably this one. Neither of them really fit the descriptions of the characters. That's also typical of these covers. There's an abundance of drinking between these two women. They form a friendship of manic seesaw roller coaster kind of friendship that you know, it's clearly some kind of a love affair. It doesn't feel like a mere friendship. And of course, I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that, you know, we know where this is going. So I'm not giving anything away by saying that they do become lovers. I was really surprised in this novel, and this sounds kind of weird, but this novel was written clearly by a woman who actually has had lesbian sex and enjoyed it and knows what she's doing and has been with women who knew what they were doing. It was not terribly graphic. I wouldn't call it anything like pornographic, but there wasn't this sort of blank space where the sex was supposed to happen, where the author was kind of like, and then they have sex, but I don't know how that goes. I don't know what happens. There was enough detail that, you know, this author knows what she's talking about. So it was, you know, in a quiet way. It was a little bit hot. And it was nice to read, you know, this sort of, it wasn't a mere sort of imagination. This woman clearly had actual lesbian relationships, that the author, as had the title character, the main character. At this point, Kim, the younger woman, wants to experience urban gay life. She wants to know what is the lesbian scene like? How do lesbians socialize? Where do they socialize? Where do they hang out, etc. So Carrie, the older woman, does still have, you know, she manages to get a hold of some of her old friends in New York City, in Manhattan, from her lesbian days, and they kind of sneak off to the city away from their husbands at some point to go to a gay bar with some of her old lesbian friends. And this part, you know, it was really sad to me because Carrie is absolutely appalled when she sees the state of her old friend, who's now in her early 40s. She describes her as seedy looking, run down, unhealthy, disgusting, like physically disgusting, butch and that's a very negative thing, and very deluded about whether or not lesbian relationships can last. Like she's kind of fooling herself with her latest girlfriend, and she kind of knows she's fooling herself, and drunken, and just like she just looks at her friend with this disgust and kind of a thank God I got out of the life, thank God I went straight kind of attitude, which I find a bit inexplicable. Her friend to me doesn't sound all that bad at all. They then go to a gay bar, which, to me, it feels like, as she's describing this gay bar, it feels like this, oh God, I can breathe again. There's this sort of sense of freedom and liberation and openness and genuine camaraderie. It's a genuine sense of community in the people who are at this bar. There's a drag show that they watch, because this is a mixed gay and lesbian bar. So there's this drag show, and it seems really, I'm just like, oh, thank God. Okay, they're out of the suburbs. They're out of this stultifying suburban heterosexual suffocation, this sort of, what do they call it? The kids call it nowadays, and this heteronormativity. They're free to express themselves and be themselves. But Carrie, the main character, sees it all as horrible, horrifying, awful, disgusting, sad, pathetic, delusional, drunken, just I was just reading this going, how is she seeing the world, this world, this beautiful community, this joyful, playful setting, as awful? But nonetheless, awful or not, as I'm reading it, it's again really clear that the woman who wrote it has really been to these kinds of bars, has really seen drag shows, has really known older lesbians, has known the gay scene in New York, I'm not sure, but a thriving gay community. So on the one hand, she's, very derogatory about the community, but on the other hand, her description of it is kind of beautiful, and you really get the sense as you're reading this that, yeah, Stonewall is coming soon. This is a community that's less and less interested in hiding who they are, hiding themselves, hiding their friends, hiding their bars. It's getting more and more open. Of course, it is New York City, so it makes it much easier. But then she's thrilled to return to suburbia, and this just stultifying life. To her, this is a wonderful thing that she's doing, returning to suburbia. I found it even more bizarre that she feels this way about what she sees as this kind of debauched gay and lesbian scene, because earlier there'd been this really awful scene of a suburban heterosexual, kind of like a swinging 60s swingers party. I found that really, really grim. There was just really raunchy, drunken gropings, heterosexual gropings, and something, well, mild sexual assault, and just kind of bored capitulation to the desires of the men, and her husband just happily joins into all of this. And I'm just thinking, this is the life you prefer? Like, this is good? Are you kidding me? And, now that I'm talking about it, I kind of feel like the author herself may have intentionally created this juxtaposition between what her protagonist feels about these two different worlds versus what she as the author is presenting in these worlds. And what she's presenting, the choice is obvious. The choice is to come out of the closet, be yourself, rejoin this liberatory community in New York City, it seems so obvious, and yet, you know, her protagonist makes this other choice. But I think the author is kind of surreptitiously telling us, you know, actually, you shouldn't make the choice the protagonist is making. But I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what you think as you read it. Obviously, after everything I've said, I'm not giving anything away by saying that this novel has one of your standard lesbian pulp novel endings. You know, needless to say, things do not work out with her and this capricious young lover who is a bit of a bitch, I'll be honest. There's a sense that what other kind of a lover could you have? But the ending on this novel feels, as I've said, some of them feel really, really tacked on. Like she just kind of went, all right, now I have to put the lesson learned, the lesbianism is bad lesson learned on the end. It didn't feel believable at all, the ending. I found this overall, this novel, a really, really interesting glimpse of a period in recent lesbian cultural history, because it was so obvious that the author herself was actually a part of the world that she was describing. I just felt like I was getting this sneak peek into a level of sort of sophistication and self-awareness that I'd kind of stupidly not really grasped was existing before Stonewall. I'm really happy to say I did some research on this author, and she agreed with me. By 1971, so this is 2 years after Stonewall, she was kind of a part of the gay rights movement. Now, she did say in 1971 that she did wish there was a cure for homosexuality, so she still held some of these beliefs that it was not healthy. But at the same time, she became very immersed in the I guess what you call the queer press. In 1978, she spoke at a conference of lesbian authors. By the late 70s, she and her lesbian partner, started their own press called Timely Books, where they reprinted a lot of women writers from the past. I don't know who those women writers were. I think some of them, well, I know at least one of them was a lesbian pulp writer because she reprinted her own books at this point, which had gone out of print. And they marketed their books to women's bookstores, which were sprouting up all over the place now. And women's bookstores were very feminist and lesbian friendly. I mean, now we're almost into my period. I came out in 1989. I was 18 years old, so that's only like 9 years after this time period I'm talking to you about. And women's bookstores were really, really important for not just the lesbian scene, but the feminist scene as well, and also any crossover between them. So anyway, she was a part of that world, not just the lesbian world, like the bars and stuff that she describes in her novel, but also the gay liberation movement, the women's press movement. So I was really pleased to discover that. And by now we're talking, 1980s, 1990s, and 90s is when I was getting the degrees I mentioned to you. These early lesbian novels, these pulp novels, were starting to be taken seriously within academia, as well as this sort of flood of new gay, lesbian, bisexual authors were finally getting published, not by pulp presses, but by real presses, or by some of the presses that they themselves were starting up, like in the case of this author. And they too were getting a real foothold in academia. I remember writing essays about many of these novels myself, not the pulp ones and the non-pulp ones. And this includes this author herself became someone who was taken seriously, I was really not at all surprised when I found that. When I started reading this novel, I was surprised by its quality, the quality of the writing, the quality of the intellect of the author. And so to see that critics and academia saw that in her as well is quite gratifying. I'm really glad. So by the early 2000s, her books were getting a lot of positive attention from critics, some of whom said that she seemed, startlingly modern, etc., which I agree. So that is a book review of The Other Side of Desire. One love was natural, the other was forbidden and dangerous. I think I'll try to do some more book reviews. I've been reading a lot lately, but I thought starting with a lesbian pulp novel would be a really fun place to begin. I think some of the other reviews will be shorter because there will be a lot less need for sort of cultural history to lay the groundwork for what I'm talking about. Anyway, I hope some people enjoy this. It's a little bit of lesbian history for you.